What should be more popular in the world of Agile but just died down? What should be more popular? Extreme programming. Easy. Has it died down? It's never been as great as it could be. It's never been as big as it could be. There's lots of reasons running through my mind right now about why. But extreme programming is without the doubt the thing for me that never took hold as well as it could have. XP, if you haven't come across it, is one of the first Agile frameworks from Kent Beck and friends, who really sat there as a group of developers and thought, if it's worth doing, what happens if we push it to the extreme? And many of the practices that you come across in the Agile world come from that team. Maybe you don't know about them, but if you don't, they're well worth a study. So we see things like pair programming, user stories, continuous integration coming out. These are all things that the developer in me still looks at and thinks, that's a brilliant idea. It's so simple, and it's often the simple ideas that are the best. And together these practices form an amazing software development method. Now, why hasn't it taken hold? Simply because it's developers. I really don't think there's anything or any great conspiracy against it. I think it is just down to how we create new developers. Many people will go to university and they will learn in academia what it means to be a software developer, often from people who aren't software developers. And that's not meant as any disrespect to the professors, the lecturers out there teaching this stuff, but unless they're cutting code daily on real production systems, they're going to fall behind the times, because the pace at which technology shifts today is so fast that if you take 2 years out, you're way behind. In fact, you're so far behind, you're going to struggle to catch up to the people you were with before. You'll be able to develop again, don't get me wrong, but you're going to have to work, and work very hard. The reason that I finally left software development was because that pace of change and my life were no longer compatible. So we have this where we have people being taught ways of working, and I'm not quoting every university course in the world with this, but many of them that I've seen don't teach current good practices in software. They teach things that are, to be brutally honest, dated. They teach them languages that aren't going to be used and work in ways that are no longer relevant. And then those people join the workforce and they're expected to know, because if you go and hire a lawyer or a doctor who's come out of university, they know how to do the job. The software folk don't. They need to be taught. So now we're teaching them new things. Some places will teach them what I consider great practices, the current good practice of the software world. Others won't have come across it and therefore won't teach it, because they are not academics. They are busy cutting code, keeping their products alive, keeping their companies alive. They're busy folk who are doing what they do because they know it works. Is it the best way? They don't know. They don't care. It's the way that works, therefore they do it. And when somebody new joins, they are taught the way that works. What we forget, though, is simply those doctors, those lawyers are given time to develop. Continuous professional development and things like that come into play that very often isn't present in the software world. So while the lawyers and the doctors will be out learning new techniques, learning about new cases, all the important stuff to their professions, the software developers are invariably expected to just get on with it, just know it. I still remember working as a developer. I was reading a book. I was sat at my desk, had a problem to solve. I was convinced this book had the answer. Didn't know where, so I started reading. Pretty thick book, a few hundred pages of really not very exciting stuff explaining the language that I was working in around the problem that I was doing. And I sat there, cup of coffee, actually, a bit of a nerd, quite good fun. My ops director saw me, insisted that I stop reading my book. So I did, put it down. Okay, what am I meant to do? Well, she was very clear, solve the problem. Okay, so I started coding. Spent the rest of the day, probably another 6 hours, coding away, got nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Couldn't answer the question because I was missing some of the knowledge. She wasn't happy with that answer either. Went home that night, didn't read the book because went home instead. Came back the next day before she turned up, I read the book, and there it was, the answer. 15 minutes later, problem solved. She didn't have a problem with me learning. She had a problem with me learning while I was meant to be working, because she differentiated those two things. Whereas actually in any profession, learning about the latest, the greatest, the things that keep you up to date is your job. And for me, if you're in the software world or you're engaged with the software world, at least an awareness of extreme programming is vital.
Love.
If you've got to this point in the video, I hope you've enjoyed it. If so, a like would be appreciated. If you want to hear more from me, more answers to questions that maybe you've got in the Agile world, please subscribe to the channel. And if you've got a question that you really want answered, drop it in the comments. I promise we'll get around to it. Thank you.